Picture this. The year is 3047. Outside, the wind howls through stone corridors, carrying with it the scent of burning peat and the distant sound of chapel bells. Inside a dimly lit chamber, lit only by flickering candles and a roaring hearth, you are about to be born into a world where your gender will determine your fate, your bloodline will shape your destiny, and your very survival will depend on political alliances you won't understand for years to come. You are about to become a medieval princess, and I promise you, it's nothing like the Disney movies. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, I'm your guide through the darker corners of history. And today we're diving deep into one of the most requested topics: what it was really like to be born into medieval royalty as a girl. Before we begin this journey together, hit that like button if you're ready to travel back 7 centuries. Subscribe if you love immersive historical storytelling, and drop a comment with your city and the time you're watching. I love seeing our global community come together to explore the past. Now, get comfortable. Maybe grab a warm drink, because we're about to spend the next hour living an entire lifetime in the 14th century. Trust me, you'll want to settle in for this one. The year is 1347. And you've just drawn your first breath in a world teetering on the edge of catastrophe. The Black Death is beginning its merciless sweep across Europe, though the adults around you don't yet know that within 2 years it will claim between 75 and 200 million lives. But right now, in this moment, there's only the warmth of swaddling cloths and the exhausted relief of your mother, Queen Isabella. You are born in the Tower of London. Yes, that Tower of London, though it won't gain its sinister reputation for another century or so. Right now, it's simply where the royal family conducts business, and where the most important births take place under heavy guard. The first sound you hear isn't your mother's voice, but the urgent whispers of midwives discussing whether you're breathing properly. Medieval infant mortality rates hover around 30%. And being royal doesn't exempt you from this harsh reality. In fact, in some ways it makes things worse. Your mother has already lost 2 children in infancy, and the weight of producing a male heir presses down on this chamber like a physical thing. When the head midwife announces a daughter, the room falls into what historians call respectful disappointment. Your father, King Edward III, loves your mother dearly, but this is the 4th girl. The realm needs sons, future kings, military commanders, political alliances through marriage. Girls, even princesses, are valuable primarily for what they can bring through strategic marriages. But here's something the midwives don't know as they clean you and wrap you in silk. You've just been born into one of the most politically tumultuous periods in medieval history. The 100 Years' War is raging. The social order is shifting. And being a princess in this era will require not just survival, but a kind of cunning that would make Machiavelli proud. Your first hours are spent not in your mother's arms. That's not how royal births work, but in the hands of a wet nurse named Marguerite, who has been carefully selected not just for her health but for her political reliability. You see, medieval people believed that character traits could be passed through breast milk. Your wet nurse had to be examined, not just physically, but morally. Was she prone to anger, melancholy? Did she have a history of lust or greed? These traits, they believed, could corrupt a royal child through nursing. As you lie in your carved wooden cradle lined with the finest imported silks, you're already accumulating a household staff that would rival a small corporation. There's your wet nurse, of course, but also a rockeress whose only job is to rock your cradle and sing lullabies, a laundress specifically for your linens, a food tester who will sample everything you consume for the next several years, and most importantly, your official guardian, usually a high-ranking noblewoman who is essentially responsible for keeping you alive and politically useful. The chamber where you spend your first months is kept deliberately warm and dim. Medieval medical theory held that newborns needed to gradually adjust to the outside world. So windows are covered with thick tapestries and braziers burn constantly. The air is heavy with the scent of herbs, believed to ward off evil spirits and disease. Rosemary for remembrance, lavender for purity, and vervain for protection against witchcraft. Yes, witchcraft. Because even as a royal infant, you are considered vulnerable to supernatural attack. A special blessing ceremony will be performed over your cradle every morning, and your swaddling clothes are embroidered with protective symbols. Your fingernails and hair clippings will be carefully collected and burned, because medieval people believed that body parts could be used in curses against you. But perhaps the most crucial element of your early months is something you won't understand for years. You are being watched, not just by your caretakers, but by foreign ambassadors, court spies, and political observers who are already calculating your future value in international marriage negotiations. Before you can even hold your head up, letters are being written to courts across Europe, describing your health, your temperament, and your potential as a future bride. By your first birthday, you've survived what medieval people called the dangerous year. Infant mortality drops significantly after 12 months, and the royal household breathes a collective sigh of relief. You're walking now, though your first steps weren't taken on soft carpets or marble floors, but on rushes, dried grasses and herbs scattered over stone floors to provide warmth and absorb the constant dampness that plagues medieval castles. Your daily routine is becoming established, and it's far more regimented than you might expect. You wake not to sunlight, your chambers still have covered windows, but to the sound of your rockeress singing the morning hymn. Medieval people believed that the first sounds a child heard each day would influence their character. So your wake-up call is carefully orchestrated religious music designed to instill piety and obedience. Breakfast is not a family affair. You eat with your household staff in your own chambers, under the watchful eye of your food tester. Your diet is surprisingly sophisticated. Soft bread soaked in wine. Yes, wine. It was considered safer than water, honey cakes and fruits that have been carefully inspected for signs of poison. The medieval fear of assassination was so pervasive that even toddler princesses required food security measures. Your clothing at this age is a miniature version of adult court dress, which means you're essentially wearing a costume that restricts movement and requires assistance to put on and remove. Your gowns are made of silk imported from Constantinople, dyed with colors so expensive that wearing certain shades is literally a mark of royal status. The deep purple of your favorite dress comes from murex shells. It takes thousands of shells to produce enough dye for a single garment, making it worth more than most people earn in a lifetime. But here's where your story takes an interesting turn. You're unusually curious. While most royal children are content to be dressed and moved like beautiful dolls, you constantly try to explore your environment. You pull at tapestries, investigate the rushes on the floor, and most alarmingly to your caretakers, you show interest in the servant children who occasionally pass through your chamber. This curiosity is both encouraged and carefully managed. Medieval educational philosophy held that noble children should be exposed to learning from the earliest age, but that exposure must be carefully controlled. Your first lessons consist of having illuminated manuscripts held in front of you while a clerk reads aloud in Latin, French, and English. You don't understand any of it, but the theory is that early exposure to multiple languages will make later learning easier. Your toys are not toys in the modern sense, but miniature adult objects designed to prepare you for your future role. You have a tiny spinning wheel, a miniature lute, and most importantly, a collection of dolls that represent different social classes. Playing with these dolls isn't just entertainment, it's training in social hierarchy. You're taught which dolls must bow to which, how to arrange them for a feast, and how to demonstrate the proper order of precedence that will govern your entire life. The most significant event of this period is your first public appearance at age 2. You're carried into the Great Hall during a Christmas feast, dressed in cloth of gold and wearing a circlet that was specially made for the occasion. You don't walk in. Walking would suggest independence, and independence in a royal woman is not yet considered a virtue. Instead, you're carried by your guardian and displayed to the assembled nobles like a precious religious relic. This appearance serves multiple purposes. It demonstrates to the court that you're healthy and growing properly. It allows foreign ambassadors to assess you as a future marriage prospect. And most importantly, it begins your education in being perpetually observed and judged. From this moment forward, you will never be alone, never be unobserved, and never be permitted to act purely on your own desires. The reaction to your appearance is carefully orchestrated but revealing. The nobles applaud and call out compliments about your beauty and your resemblance to your mother. What they're really evaluating, though, is your potential utility. Are you likely to be attractive enough to secure a prestigious marriage? Do you seem healthy enough to survive to adulthood and bear children? Do you carry yourself with the dignity appropriate to your station? You're too young to understand any of this, of course. To you, it's simply a confusing experience of being stared at by hundreds of strangers in a hall that echoes with noise and smells of roasted meat and unwashed bodies. You cry, which your guardian interprets as appropriately modest behavior for a princess. If you had smiled too much, it would have suggested unseemly boldness. By age 5, your real education begins, and it's unlike anything a modern child would recognize as learning. You're moved to your own set of chambers, still heavily guarded and supervised, but separate from the nursery. This transition marks your official recognition as a person rather than simply a royal infant, though your personhood comes with very specific limitations. Your day now begins before dawn with religious instruction. Medieval Christianity isn't the gentle, loving religion often portrayed in modern media. It's a complex theological system that governs every aspect of daily life. And as a princess, you're expected to be a model of religious observance. You learn not just prayers but the intricate hierarchy of saints, the proper rituals for different feast days, and most importantly, the religious justifications for royal authority. Your primary tutor is Brother Thomas, a Benedictine monk who was selected not just for his learning but for his complete lack of personal ambition. Male tutors for royal girls were always chosen carefully. They had to be learned enough to provide proper education, but not charismatic enough to become romantic interests as you grew older. Brother Thomas fits this requirement perfectly. He's scholarly, devout, and has a facial scar that makes him less likely to inspire inappropriate feelings. But here's where your education becomes fascinating from a historical perspective. You're receiving one of the most comprehensive educations available to anyone in medieval Europe, regardless of gender. While peasant children, if they receive any education at all, might learn basic prayers and simple agricultural skills, you're studying Latin grammar, rhetoric, mathematics, astronomy, and music theory. Your Latin lessons are particularly rigorous because Latin is the language of diplomacy, law, and scholarship. You're reading simplified versions of classical texts, not because the full versions are too difficult, but because they're considered morally inappropriate for a young girl. Instead of Caesar's accounts of warfare, you read Ovid's less violent mythological stories. Instead of political philosophy, you study moral philosophy as it relates to feminine virtue. Mathematics might seem like a neutral subject, but even your arithmetic lessons are designed to reinforce your future role. You learn to calculate not abstract numbers but dowries, household expenses, and the complex financial arrangements that govern noble marriages. Your word problems involve calculating how much grain is needed to feed a castle household, how to divide inheritance among children of different gender and birth order, and how to determine the proper financial compensation for various levels of diplomatic insult. Music theory is perhaps your favorite subject. Though it comes with its own political complexities, you learn to play the lute, the harp, and a small organ, but your repertoire is carefully controlled. You're taught religious hymns, courtly love songs that celebrate idealized romance, and popular songs that have been edited to remove any politically subversive content. Music, like everything else in your education, is a tool for demonstrating your refinement while reinforcing appropriate social values. Your most challenging subject is what your tutors call governance, though it's really a combination of political theory, diplomacy, and social psychology. You learn the genealogies of major noble houses across Europe, not as mere memorization exercises, but as studies in political alliance and conflict. You study maps, not just to learn geography, but to understand trade routes, military advantages, and the strategic value of different territories. But perhaps the most crucial part of your education is what happens between formal lessons. You're learning to read people. Medieval court life is a constant game of hidden motivations, shifting alliances, and coded communication. You learn to interpret facial expressions, decode the meanings behind gift-giving, and understand the subtle social signals that indicate who is rising or falling in royal favor. Your tutors teach you languages not just as academic subjects, but as tools of espionage. You're fluent in French because it's the language of international diplomacy, but you also speak English, Latin, and are beginning to learn German and Italian. More importantly, you're taught to shift between languages strategically, speaking Latin when you want to exclude non-educated listeners, French when you want to demonstrate international sophistication, and English when you want to appeal to popular sentiment. Physical education is not neglected, though it's carefully adapted to feminine expectations. You learn to ride horses, side saddle of course, and you're taught basic sword work, though this is presented as dancing rather than combat training. You learn archery, officially as a courtly accomplishment, though the practical military applications aren't lost on you. Your education in womanly arts is extensive and politically motivated. You learn embroidery not just as decoration, but as a form of coded communication. Certain patterns and color combinations can convey messages between women who share the knowledge. You learn herbcraft, officially for household management, though the line between medicine and poison is deliberately left ambiguous in your lesson. Most importantly, you're receiving an education in what medieval people called dissimulation, the art of concealing your true thoughts and intentions while appearing to be completely transparent. This isn't considered dishonesty, it's considered essential survival skill for anyone operating at high political levels. At age 10, you experience what medieval people called the age of discretion, meaning you're now considered old enough to be held morally responsible for your actions. This transition brings new freedoms, but also new dangers and responsibilities that would overwhelm most modern children. Your daily routine expands beyond the confines of your chambers. You're now expected to attend court functions, participate in religious ceremonies, and begin what amounts to diplomatic training through carefully supervised social interactions. But you're also beginning to understand the true nature of your position. You're simultaneously one of the most powerful and most powerless people in the kingdom. Your power comes from your bloodline and the political alliances your eventual marriage will create. Your powerlessness comes from the fact that you have virtually no control over how that power will be used. Marriage negotiations regarding your future have been ongoing since you were 5 years old, and by now you're aware that your personal preferences will have little to do with the final decision. This awareness creates what historians call the princess paradox. You're being educated to be intelligent, capable, and strong-willed because these qualities make you more valuable as a political ally and more effective as a future ruler's consort. But you're also being taught that using these qualities independently rather than in service to male-directed political goals is inappropriate and potentially dangerous. Your relationship with your mother becomes more complex during this period. Queen Isabella is one of the most politically astute women of her era, and she begins to share with you insights about court colics that your male tutors cannot provide. She teaches you how to read the subtle signs of a woman's pregnancy before it's announced, crucial information for predicting succession changes, how to interpret the political meanings behind fashion choices, and most importantly, how to maintain your own sources of information independent from official channels. Your mother's lessons often take place during what appears to be innocent activities. While embroidering together, she tells you about the hidden alliances between noble ladies. During music practice, she explains how certain songs are coded messages of support for different political factions. While walking in the castle gardens, she points out which servants can be trusted with sensitive information and which ones report directly to your father's political enemy. These conversations reveal to you that there's an entire parallel political system operating through the women of the court. While the men conduct their diplomacy through formal treaties and military alliances, the women maintain their own networks of information, influence, and mutual support. You're being initiated into this system, though your mother makes it clear that your participation must always appear to be subordinate to male political priorities. Your religious education becomes more sophisticated and frankly more disturbing. You learn about the theological debates surrounding women's souls, the religious justifications for different forms of political authority, and the complex relationship between earthly and divine power. You also learn about the Inquisition, which is gaining power across Europe and represents a very real threat even to royal families who fall out of favor with religious authority. Brother Thomas introduces you to the concept of just war and the religious obligations of rulers to protect their subjects, but also to expand their territories when God wills it. These lessons are preparing you to support military campaigns that will inevitably result in thousands of deaths, and you're being taught to see this support as not just politically necessary but morally required. Your education in economics becomes more practical and more disturbing. You learn how taxation systems work, but also how they can be manipulated to fund specific political goals. You study trade relationships, but also how economic pressure can be used to force political compliance. Most unsettling, you learn about the economic value of warfare, how military campaigns can be profitable through conquest, ransom, and the redistribution of land ownership. The most significant change during this period is your introduction to the concept of political marriage as a form of warfare conducted through other means. You learn to analyze potential marriage alliances not in terms of personal compatibility, but in terms of territorial advantages, succession implications, and the long-term balance of power between royal houses. Your tutors present you with hypothetical scenarios. If you married the heir to the French throne, what would happen to English territorial claims in Normandy? If you married a German prince, how would that affect relationships with the Holy Roman Emperor? If you married within England, what domestic political advantages might that create? And what international opportunities might be lost? These exercises are presented as intellectual puzzles, but you understand that they're really auditions. Your responses are being evaluated not just for political astuteness, but for your willingness to prioritize political utility over personal preference. The correct answers always involve putting dynastic interests ahead of individual desires. By your 13th birthday, you've reached what medieval society considers marriageable age, and the tempo of marriage negotiations intensifies dramatically. You're now considered a woman in the eyes of the church and the law, though you won't gain any meaningful independence until marriage, and even then only within very specific constraints. Your physical development is monitored as carefully as a military campaign. Your monthly cycles are tracked by your guardian and reported to your parents, not out of concern for your health, but because fertility is your primary political asset. The irregularity of teenage hormones creates diplomatic complications. Marriage negotiations can be delayed or accelerated based on medical assessments of your reproductive readiness. This intimate surveillance extends to every aspect of your physical and emotional life. Your food consumption is monitored for signs of illness or pregnancy. Your emotional state is evaluated for signs of instability that might make you a less desirable marriage prospect. Even your sleep patterns are observed and documented. Because medieval medical theory held that sleep habits could indicate future fertility and the likelihood of successful childbirth. Your education expands to include subjects that would horrify modern parents. You receive detailed instruction in the management of household violence. Not how to prevent it, but how to minimize its political consequences. You learn to read the signs of physical abuse in servants and how to provide just enough intervention to maintain household stability without challenging male authority. You study the protocols for dealing with sexual assault within your future household, focusing on damage control rather than justice for victims. These lessons are presented matter-of-factly, as practical skills you'll need as a future noble wife. Your tutors explain that household violence is inevitable in a world where physical force is the ultimate source of authority, and your job will be to manage it effectively, rather than eliminate it. The casual acceptance of these realities is perhaps more shocking than the realities themselves. Your religious education becomes darker and more complex. You learn about the theological justifications for the subordination of women, but also about the religious traditions that occasionally elevated women to positions of spiritual authority. You study the lives of female saints, but with emphasis on their suffering and submission rather than their achievements and independence. Brother Thomas introduces you to the concept of divine right and explains how royal authority derives from God, but he also teaches you about the religious obligations that come with that authority. You learn that kings and queens will be judged by God for how they use their power, but also that questioning royal authority is equivalent to questioning God's will. It's a theological trap that makes resistance both futile and sinful. Your political education becomes increasingly sophisticated and morally ambiguous. You learn about the use of torture in judicial proceedings, the management of peasant uprisings, and the economic benefits of religious persecution. These subjects are taught not as moral dilemmas, but as practical challenges you'll need to navigate as a future royal consort. You study historical examples of successful royal marriages, focusing on how queens managed to maintain political influence while appearing to defer to their husband. You learn about queens who effectively ruled kingdoms while their husbands were absent or incompetent, but always within the fiction of masculine authority. You study queens who successfully manipulated succession disputes to advance their children's interests, and queens who were executed for overreaching their political bounds. The most crucial part of your education during this period involves learning to evaluate your own worth in dynastic terms. You're taught to think of yourself as a collection of political assets: your bloodline, your fertility, your education, your connections, and your ability to inspire loyalty in others. Personal happiness, individual desires, and emotional fulfillment are never presented as factors in major life decisions. Your relationship with your father becomes more complex and uncomfortable. King Edward III has always been affectionate, but distant, but now your interactions are colored by his awareness of your emerging political value. He begins to include you in diplomatic receptions where your presence sends specific messages to foreign ambassadors about potential marriage alliances. These events are elaborate performances where you're simultaneously the star and the commodity. You're dressed in clothing that demonstrates the wealth and sophistication of the English court, but also in colors and styles that send coded messages about political allegiances. Your behavior is carefully choreographed to demonstrate intelligence and refinement, without suggesting dangerous independence. During these diplomatic receptions, you practice a skill that will define the rest of your life: performing enthusiasm for your own exploitation. You learn to smile graciously when introduced to potential future husbands, to express appropriate interest in foreign cultures you may be forced to join, and to appear grateful for marriage negotiations that treat you as a valuable object to be traded for political advantage. At 15, you've become what medieval chroniclers euphemistically call a rose in full bloom, meaning you're considered optimally marriageable. The competing political pressures surrounding your marriage have reached a fever pitch, and you're beginning to understand that your wedding will be less a celebration of love than a treaty ceremony with a wedding dress. Current negotiations involve no fewer than 7 potential husbands across 4 different kingdoms. Each option comes with complex political implications that you've learned to analyze with the cold precision of a military strategist. The French Dauphin would end decades of warfare, but would require you to renounce your English identity. The Holy Roman Emperor's younger brother would create a powerful anti-French alliance, but would require conversion to a different branch of Christianity. Various German princes offer territorial advantages in exchange for different levels of subordination to imperial authority. Your dowry negotiations have become a matter of international diplomacy. Your marriage portion includes not just gold and jewelry, but territorial claims, trading rights, and military alliances that will reshape the balance of power in medieval Europe. You've been assigned a team of financial advisors who calculate your worth down to individual silver coins, taking into account not just your inheritance, but your fertility prospects, your political connections, and your ability to influence your future husband's decision. The most sophisticated part of these negotiations involves what medieval diplomats called reversionary planning. Contingency arrangements for what happens if your marriage produces only daughters, if you die in childbirth, if your husband dies young, or if political circumstances change dramatically. These discussions treat your entire life as a series of probability calculations, with backup plans for every possible scenario, including your own death. Your daily routine now includes marriage preparation that goes far beyond learning domestic skills. You're studying the languages, customs, and political situations of your potential new home. You practice different forms of court etiquette, because each royal court has its own complex protocols, and violating them could create diplomatic incidents. You learn the genealogies and political alliances of noble families you may need to navigate as a foreign queen. More disturbingly, you're receiving instruction in what your tutors euphemistically call marital duties. Medieval marriage manuals for noble women focus heavily on the political and economic aspects of sexual relationships. You learn about the legal implications of consummation, the political significance of pregnancy timing, and the diplomatic protocols for dealing with your husband's inevitable extramarital relationship. These lessons are taught with clinical detachment, focusing on your obligations rather than your rights or preferences. You learn that refusal of sexual relations can be grounds for marriage annulment, which would be a political disaster for both your birth family and your married family. You also learn that accusations of adultery, even if false, can be used to justify your execution and the dissolution of political alliances based on your marriage. Your mother takes over much of this instruction, and her lessons are more honest and more frightening than anything your formal tutors provide. She explains the realities of medieval obstetrics, including the high probability that you'll die in childbirth and the political implications of that death for any children you might leave behind. She teaches you how to identify the signs of potentially fatal complications and how to write political instructions that will protect your children if you don't survive their births. Queen Isabella also teaches you about the shadow economy of royal households, the networks of bribery, espionage, and influence trading that determine much of actual political decision-making. You learn to identify which servants can be bought, which ones are already reporting to foreign governments, and which ones might be persuaded to serve your interests rather than their official employers. Most importantly, your mother teaches you about the informal power structures that operate parallel to official authority. She explains how royal mistresses often wield more practical influence than legal wives, how alliances between queens can sometimes override treaties between kings, and how the threat of scandal can be more powerful than the threat of military force. During this period, you also receive your first direct exposure to the brutal realities of medieval justice. You attend your first public execution, a diplomatic necessity since royal presence at punishments demonstrates support for the legal system. The condemned man is a nobleman who was caught selling military intelligence to French agents, and his execution by drawing and quartering is designed to send a message about the consequences of treason. The experience is intended to be educational rather than traumatic. Your tutors explain the legal principles that justify torture and execution, the political necessity of public punishment, and the religious framework that makes this violence not just acceptable but morally required. You're expected to watch impassively and to understand that similar violence could be directed against you if you ever threaten the political stability of the realm. This exposure to state violence serves a dual purpose. It demonstrates the power that you're connected to through your royal bloodline, but it also makes clear the consequences of challenging that power. You're simultaneously protected by royal authority and threatened by it, and this contradiction will define every major decision for the rest of your life. After months of increasingly complex negotiations, your marriage is finally arranged. You will wed Prince Johann of Bavaria, second son of the Holy Roman Emperor. The choice represents a compromise between multiple competing political pressures. It creates a valuable anti-French alliance without giving too much power to any single foreign state. It maintains England's independence while providing military security, and it offers the possibility of future imperial connections without immediate subordination to imperial authority. You meet your future husband exactly twice before your wedding day. These meetings are carefully orchestrated diplomatic events where every word and gesture is planned in advance and observed by representatives from both families. Prince Johann is 23 years old, speaks adequate French and Latin, and appears to be in reasonable physical health. These are the primary qualifications for a successful political marriage. Personal compatibility is not considered relevant. Your wedding preparations consume 6 months and involve coordinated efforts across multiple kingdoms. Your dress is being created by the finest craftsmen in Paris, using silk from Constantinople, pearls from the North Sea, and gold thread that was literally worth more than most people's annual income. The dress itself is a political statement, incorporating heraldic symbols that announce the new alliance to everyone who sees you wear it. The guest list for your wedding reads like a directory of medieval European power. Kings, queens, princes, dukes, archbishops, and papal representatives will attend, not to celebrate your happiness, but to witness the formal creation of new political relationships. Your wedding is simultaneously a religious ceremony, a diplomatic conference, and a public demonstration of royal power. Your trousseau, the collection of household goods you'll bring to your marriage, represents the transfer of English wealth and political influence to the German territory. It includes not just clothing and jewelry, but books, musical instruments, religious artifacts, and most importantly, a staff of English servants who will maintain connections between your new household and your birth family. These servants are as much intelligence agents as domestic workers. The week before your wedding, you experience what medieval sources call bride melancholy, a condition so common among political brides that it was considered a predictable part of the marriage process. You understand that you're about to lose your identity as an English princess and become a German noble wife, with all the cultural and personal adjustments that transformation requires. Your mother provides what comfort she can, but her advice focuses on political survival rather than emotional support. She teaches you how to maintain English loyalties while appearing to adopt German interests, how to gather intelligence without appearing to spy, and how to influence your husband's decisions while maintaining the appearance of wifely submission. Queen Isabella also gives you more personal advice that reveals the emotional toll of royal marriages. She explains how to find moments of privacy and genuine human connection within the elaborate performance of noble marriage. She teaches you how to identify trustworthy servants who might become genuine confidantes, and how to create small spaces of personal autonomy within the larger structure of political obligation. The wedding ceremony itself is a masterpiece of medieval pageantry and political theater. You process through London's streets lined with citizens who cheer not for your personal happiness but for the political alliance your marriage represents. Your dress weighs nearly 30 pounds, and walking in it requires careful coordination with your attendants to avoid tripping on the elaborate train. The religious ceremony combines Christian marriage ritual with diplomatic protocol. You exchange vows not just with your husband but essentially with the political entity he represents. The wedding liturgy has been modified to include prayers for the success of the new Anglo-German alliance and for the military victories it's expected to produce. Your wedding feast is a week-long celebration that serves as an international diplomatic conference. Between courses of elaborate medieval cuisine, treaties are negotiated, military alliances are confirmed, and trade agreements are established. Your marriage is the centerpiece of a comprehensive restructuring of European political relationships. But perhaps the most significant moment of your wedding comes during the bedding ceremony, a medieval tradition where the bride and groom are publicly escorted to their marriage bed to ensure that the union is properly consummated. This ritual, which modern people would find horrifying, represents the moment when your marriage becomes politically and legally binding. The witnesses to your bedding ceremony include representatives from both royal families, church officials, and foreign ambassadors who need to confirm that your marriage has been legally completed. Your privacy is completely sacrificed to political necessity, and this sacrifice establishes the pattern that will govern the rest of your married life. 6 months into your marriage, you're living in a castle near Munich, struggling to navigate the complex cultural and political landscape of your new home. Your husband is kind enough, though you share no common interests beyond the political necessities that brought you together. More challenging than your marital relationship, however, are the intricate court politics that you must master to survive as a foreign queen in German territory. Your household staff is a careful mixture of English servants you brought from home and German servants assigned to you by your new family. This arrangement creates constant tension as both groups report your activities to their respective political master. Every conversation, every decision, and every personal preference becomes intelligence that may be used in future diplomatic negotiations. Your struggle to learn German is complicated by the political implications of language use. Speaking English with your personal servants demonstrates loyalty to your birth family, but suggests resistance to cultural integration. Speaking German with German courtiers shows appropriate adaptation but may reveal political information that you intended to keep confidential. Even casual conversation becomes a form of diplomatic maneuvering. Your correspondence with your family in England is monitored by German officials, while your correspondence with your German relatives is undoubtedly monitored by English agents embedded in your household. You learn to write letters that appear personal and affectionate, while actually conveying carefully coded political information. Every family update becomes a form of international espionage. The most challenging aspect of your new life is navigating the religious differences between English and German Christianity. While both are Catholic, the political relationships between church and state operate differently in each kingdom, and these differences create constant opportunities for diplomatic misstep. Your attendance at religious ceremonies, your donations to specific monasteries, and even your choice of confessor send political messages that can complicate international relations. Your pregnancy, which occurs in your second year of marriage, transforms you from a diplomatic asset into a potential political crisis. The health of your pregnancy, the gender of your child, and the success of your delivery will all have international implications. If you die in childbirth, the political alliance created by your marriage may collapse. If you produce only daughters, the long-term strategic value of the marriage will be diminished. Medieval obstetrics offers little beyond prayer and herbal remedies. So your pregnancy becomes an extended period of political anxiety for courts across Europe. Your morning sickness is documented and reported to foreign governments. Your physical condition is assessed by physicians whose medical opinions carry diplomatic weight. Even your food cravings are interpreted as signs of your child's future temperament and political reliability. Your first child is a son, which creates celebration in both England and Germany but also establishes new political complications. Your baby is simultaneously an English prince by blood and a German noble by birth, and these dual loyalties will shape his entire life. More immediately, his existence makes you more politically valuable but also more vulnerable to accusations of divided loyalty.